The jungle was supposed to protect them. Thick trees. Dark shadows. Endless green. Instead, it became a furnace. The air ignited. Leaves vanished in seconds. The ground itself seemed to scream. From the edge of the jungle, a tank moved forward. Slow. Heavy. Relentless. No cannon fired. No bullets flew. Then the fire came. A river of flame poured out, bending around trees, crawling into bunkers, swallowing everything in its path. Men who could not be seen were suddenly everywhere, running, burning, screaming, disappearing. This was not a battlefield anymore. It was a firestorm. In the Pacific jungles of World War II, a new weapon erased hiding places, turned nature into an enemy, and changed jungle warfare forever. These were flamethrower tanks. And once they entered the jungle, there was nowhere left to hide. World War II was not fought only on open fields and ruined cities. Some of its deadliest battles were hidden beneath thick jungle canopies, where sunlight barely touched the ground and danger waited in silence. The Pacific Theater was a war of concealment. An enemy that could not be seen. Bunkers carved into hillsides. Caves sealed by earth and roots. Positions built to survive artillery, bullets, and time itself. Traditional weapons struggled here. Rifles could not reach what the eyes could not find. Artillery shattered trees but left defenders untouched beneath the soil. Even tanks, kings of open warfare, became blind and vulnerable in the jungle. Every advance cost lives. Every step forward invited ambush. Every hidden bunker turned victory into a nightmare. To break this stalemate, commanders turned to an ancient fear, fire. Not as scattered flames. Not as burning shells. But as a controlled, relentless weapon mounted on steel. Flamethrower tanks were created to hunt what could not be seen, to reach what could not be bombed, and to force an enemy out of the earth itself. In the jungles of the Pacific, these machines did more than fight soldiers. They turned the battlefield into fire. The problem was not bravery. The problem was the battlefield. The Pacific War was unlike anything Allied forces had faced before. It was not a war of lines and frontiers. It was a war of shadows. Japanese forces did not defend territory the traditional way. They disappeared into it. They dug deep into hillsides. They carved bunkers into rock. They built tunnel networks beneath jungles so thick they swallowed sound itself. An enemy could be 10 meters away and completely invisible. Every advance became deadly. Machine gun fire erupted from nowhere. Snipers fired once and vanished. Mortars fell from unseen positions. Infantry attacks were devastating. Flamethrower teams on foot were effective, but exposed. Engineers had to crawl forward under fire. Casualties were high. Progress was slow. Traditional tanks were no solution. Their cannons could shatter trees but not silence bunkers. Their shells exploded on reinforced earth and stone. Their limited visibility made them vulnerable to mines, satchel charges, and ambushes at point-blank range. Fire, however, changed everything. Flames did not need precision. They flowed. They crept. They entered cracks, tunnels, and ventilation shafts. They consumed oxygen. They forced defenders to flee or suffocate. Commanders understood something brutal but effective. You could not always destroy a bunker. But you could make it unlivable. The idea was simple. Mount fire on armor. Protect the crew. Extend the range. Increase the terror. Thus, flamethrower tanks were born. These machines were not designed to duel enemy armor. They were built to erase hiding places. To clear jungle fortifications that artillery could not touch. To break defensive lines without sending waves of infantry to die. Fuel tanks replaced ammunition racks. Flame projectors replaced machine guns. A single burst could turn a fortified position into an inferno within seconds. The psychological impact was immediate. Enemy soldiers feared fire more than bullets. Enemy soldiers feared fire more than bullets. Bunkers that once held firm were abandoned. Entire defensive networks collapsed without prolonged fighting. But this solution came at a cost. Flamethrower tanks became priority targets. Their crews knew that one hit could turn their vehicle into a rolling bomb. Yet they advanced anyway. Because in the jungles of the Pacific, survival demanded a weapon that could reach the unseen. And fire was the only answer. These tanks did not look very different at first glance. They moved like normal armored vehicles. They carried familiar silhouettes. Steel hulls. Tracked wheels. Rotating turrets. But inside, everything was different. Where ammunition racks once sat, fuel tanks were installed. Thick, pressurized containers filled with flammable liquid. Gasoline-based mixtures. Sticky. Heavy. Deadly. Instead of a standard machine gun, a flame projector was mounted. Sometimes in the hull. Sometimes replacing the main gun. Sometimes hidden behind armor plating to disguise its true purpose. One of the most famous examples was the modified M4 Sherman. Nicknamed Zippo tanks by American crews. Not because they were light. But because they turned the battlefield into a lighter spark. When activated, the system forced fuel through reinforced hoses. Compressed gas pushed it forward. A pilot flame ignited the stream as it exited the nozzle. What emerged was not a burst. It was a sustained river of fire. The range shocked even experienced soldiers. 30 meters. 40 meters. Sometimes more. Flames curved around trees. They bounced off rock faces. They poured downward into trenches and tunnels. The heat was overwhelming. Metal glowed. Air vanished. Oxygen was consumed in seconds. Inside bunkers, survival became impossible. Defenders faced suffocation before flames even reached them. Those who escaped often ran directly into machine gun fire. But these tanks were not invincible. Their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Fuel. A direct hit could be catastrophic. If the fuel ignited, there was no escape. Crews knew this. Everyone inside knew this. Protective measures were added. Armor shielding around fuel lines. Improved valves. Emergency shut-off systems. Still, fear followed every mission. Flamethrower tank crews were marked men. Enemy soldiers prioritized them above all else. Mines were placed along their paths. Artillery focused on their advance. Yet commanders kept deploying them. Because no other weapon cleared jungle defenses faster. No artillery barrage matched their efficiency. No infantry assault matched their psychological impact. These tanks were not meant to win wars alone. They were tools. Brutal tools. Designed for a very specific environment. Dense jungle. Hidden enemy. Fortifications buried deep in the earth. In those conditions, steel alone was not enough. So the tanks carried fire. And wherever they went, the jungle changed forever. The first time a flamethrower tank entered the jungle, everything changed. The engine growled low. Tracks crushed roots and fallen branches. Leaves shook as the steel mass pushed forward. The jungle closed in around it. Visibility dropped to meters. Every shadow felt alive. Every silence felt wrong. Infantry followed behind, tense and alert. They knew what waited ahead. Hidden bunkers. Camouflaged firing ports. Entrances carved so carefully into earth and stone they looked like part of the jungle itself. Then the first bunker revealed itself. A sudden burst of gunfire. Muzzle flashes flickering between vines. Bullets snapping against armor. The tank stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flamethrower ignited. A roar unlike artillery or gunfire filled the air. A continuous, furious sound. Like a living thing unleashed. Fire surged forward in a thick, rolling stream. It wrapped around trees. It flowed over rocks. It poured directly into the bunker's entrance. The jungle exploded into light. Leaves disintegrated. Wood ignited instantly. The heat was so intense it pushed air backward. Inside the bunker, there was no fight. No return fire. Only panic. Flames consumed oxygen faster than lungs could draw breath. Smoke filled every tunnel. Darkness turned to blinding orange. Some defenders tried to flee. They ran from their positions. They burst from hidden exits. Burning. Disoriented. Desperate. Infantry fire cut them down. Others never emerged. As the tank moved forward, the process repeated. Bunker after bunker. Position after position. Hidden defenses that had held for weeks collapsed in minutes. The psychological impact was devastating. Japanese soldiers were trained to fight to the death. To endure bombardment. To survive isolation. To remain unseen. Fire destroyed all of that. You could hide from bullets. You could survive shelling underground. But fire followed you wherever you went. Flamethrower tanks did not need to search for exact targets. They swept areas clean. They denied space. They erased cover. Entire sections of jungle became uninhabitable. The ground smoldered. Trees burned from the inside. Smoke hung thick for hours. Advances that once cost hundreds of lives now moved forward behind a wall of flame. But the battlefield was not one-sided. The enemy adapted. Flamethrower tanks became prime targets. Mines were buried along narrow jungle paths. Artillery waited for the sound of engines. Suicide attackers charged through smoke with explosives strapped to their bodies. Every mission was a gamble. Crews advanced knowing they were feared. And hunted. One mistake. One lucky hit. And the tank would vanish in fire. Still, commanders kept sending them in. Because the results were undeniable. Positions that resisted days of bombardment fell in minutes. Cave systems once thought impregnable were cleared. Entire defensive lines collapsed without prolonged engagement. The jungle itself seemed to retreat. But after the flames died down, silence returned. Charred ground. Blackened trees. The smell of burned earth and fuel. Victory came at a cost that lingered long after the fighting stopped. The jungle would grow back. Nature always did. But for those who witnessed it, the memory never faded. They had seen jungles turn into firestorms. And they knew war had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The physical destruction was only part of the weapon's power. The real damage happened in the mind. Fire does something bullets cannot. It terrifies. For Japanese defenders, flamethrower tanks represented absolute horror. They could endure artillery. They could survive bombing. They could hide from gunfire. But fire hunted them. Bunkers that once felt safe became death traps. Tunnels turned into ovens. The earth itself betrayed them. Veterans later described the sound first. The roar. Louder than explosions. Closer than gunfire. Then the heat. Unavoidable. Suffocating. Many soldiers abandoned positions without orders. Some fled before the flames even reached them. Fear spread faster than fire. Entire defensive systems collapsed not because they were destroyed, but because they were no longer manned. For Allied soldiers, the impact was different, but no less severe. Operating a flamethrower tank was not heroic. It was heavy. It was slow. It was intimate. Crews saw everything. They watched bunkers ignite. They saw enemies run. They knew exactly what their weapon did. Many carried that knowledge long after the war ended. Some spoke of nightmares. Others refused to talk at all. Fire left memories that could not be buried. Infantry units felt conflicted. The tanks saved lives. They reduced casualties. They cleared positions that would have killed dozens of men. But victory came wrapped in silence. No cheers followed a flamethrower assault. Only smoke. And stillness. The jungle after an attack felt unnatural. Burned. Empty. Quiet. Even seasoned soldiers described it as unsettling. War had always been brutal. But flamethrower tanks made brutality unavoidable. Visible. Immediate. There was no distance between cause and effect. No abstraction. Just fire and its result. For many, that line was hard to cross. And impossible to forget. When the fighting moved on, the scars remained. On the land. On the men. Long after the jungle grew green again, the psychological burns endured. Because some weapons do not stop working when the battle ends. They follow you home. When the war ended, the fire did not disappear with it. Questions remained. Flamethrower tanks had proven their effectiveness. They saved Allied lives. They broke defenses that nothing else could. They shortened battles that might have dragged on for months. But effectiveness did not erase discomfort. Fire as a weapon crossed an invisible line. It did not simply defeat the enemy. It overwhelmed them. Physically. Psychologically. Debate followed. Some military leaders defended their use. They argued necessity. Jungle warfare demanded extreme solutions. Every bunker cleared by fire meant fewer infantry funerals. Others were uneasy. Flamethrowers caused suffering that was impossible to ignore. Deaths were slow. Panic was unavoidable. Survival often depended on luck rather than skill. After World War II, international attitudes began to shift. Fire weapons were not banned outright, but their use became increasingly restricted. By the late 20th century, flamethrowers were viewed as politically dangerous weapons. Effective, yes. But controversial. Modern armies moved away from them. Precision replaced terror. Guided munitions replaced fire streams. Flamethrower tanks faded from battlefields. Yet their legacy remains. They represent a moment in warfare when desperation reshaped morality. When winning quickly mattered more than how victory looked. When fear itself became a tactical advantage. Historians still debate them. Soldiers still remember them. And jungles still carry traces of where they burned. Flamethrower tanks were not symbols of triumph. They were symbols of necessity. A reminder that war does not always choose clean solutions. Sometimes, it chooses fire. When the flames finally died out, the jungle remained silent. No gunfire. No engines. Only ash and smoke. The battles moved on. The war continued elsewhere. But the marks left behind could not be erased so easily. Flamethrower tanks achieved their purpose. They broke impossible defenses. They saved lives on one side by ending resistance on the other. They reshaped how jungle warfare was fought. But they also revealed something darker. That in war, victory often demands choices that haunt those who make them. That some weapons win battles while leaving scars that never heal. On the land. On the mind. The jungles of the Pacific eventually grew green again. Vines reclaimed burned ground. Trees rose where bunkers once stood. Nature recovered. People did not. For the soldiers who witnessed it, fire became a memory that followed them home. For history, flamethrower tanks became a warning. A reminder that technology can solve problems. But it can also expose how far humanity is willing to go to survive. These tanks did not just turn jungles into firestorms. They forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. In war, the most powerful weapons are not always the ones that destroy the enemy. They are the ones that change us forever. History often remembers victories. Dates. Names. Maps. But it is the weapons that reveal the truth. Flamethrower tanks were not built for glory. They were built for desperation. For a war that refused to be fought cleanly. In the jungles of the Pacific, fire became an answer no one wanted, but everyone used. And stories like this remind us why World War II still matters. Not because of who won, but because of what it cost. If you want to understand the hidden weapons, the untold battles, and the human stories behind the history books, this channel exists for that reason. Because some stories should never fade. They should be remembered. And they should be told.